For years, Officers Briggs and Reynolds harassed, humiliated, and brutalized without consequence, knowing that they were untouchable. Then, one day, they stopped two black twins, Malcolm and Isaiah Carter. The brothers were unarmed. The officers didn't care. When one twin pushed back, refusing to be treated like a criminal, they escalated. Words became threats, and threats became force. And then, when Malcolm moved, they shot him dead. His brother was left beaten, handcuffed, forced to watch his twin bleed out on the pavement. Now, Isaiah Carter, a Delta Force operative with a debt to settle, is coming for them. They thought their version of events would be the only one that mattered. They thought their power made them untouchable. They thought the system would erase their sins, just like it always had. But this time, the system won't save them, because Isaiah Carter is coming, and nothing will stop him from getting his vengeance. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe. The hum of the engine purred beneath them as the smooth black Dodge Charger coasted through the quiet streets, its polished frame reflecting the golden glow of the streetlights that lined the pristine sidewalks. Inside, Malcolm Carter sat behind the wheel, fingers drumming lightly against the steering wheel, his sharp gaze flicking between the road and his twin brother in the passenger seat. Isaiah, more relaxed but always observant, sat with his arm resting against the window, watching the well-manicured lawns and neatly trimmed hedges roll past in uniform perfection. You ever notice how these neighborhoods all look the same? Malcolm mused, shaking his head slightly. Every house damn near identical. Like someone copy-pasted the whole block. Isaiah smirked. Ava liked that when she bought the place. Said it felt safe. Safe, Malcolm scoffed, rolling his eyes. I bet it feels real safe when you actually live here. But for us? You think they see two black men in a Charger at this hour and think, oh, they must be visiting family? Isaiah let out a quiet breath, knowing exactly where this was going. Malcolm, don't start. I'm just saying, man, Malcolm continued, his fingers tightening around the wheel. We're driving through one of the richest neighborhoods in the city, and you know damn well we're going to get side-eyed for it. Isaiah sighed, rubbing his temple. We're not doing this tonight. It's been a long month. I want to see Ava, have dinner, and not think about any of this. Malcolm exhaled sharply, his jaw still tight. But he didn't push it further. He just let the silence settle between them as the houses passed by in perfect symmetry, each one illuminated just enough to highlight their exclusivity. Then, just as he was about to switch the subject, Isaiah's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, his posture subtly shifting. Cop car, he muttered. Malcolm didn't react at first, just kept driving. But his grip on the wheel hardened slightly. Where? Just past us on the other side of the street. Marked unit. Neither of them turned their heads to look. But they could feel it, the weight of being noticed. The unspoken calculation happening behind them. The cruiser rolled past, slowing just slightly as it went by, just enough for its occupants to get a good look at them. Then came the moment neither of them needed to see to understand. The U-turn. Malcolm let out a low chuckle, humorless, eyes never leaving the road ahead. Well, look at that. Right on schedule. Isaiah exhaled slowly, his voice steady but firm. Mal, just keep driving normal. Yeah, Malcolm muttered. Like that matters. The blue and red lights flared to life behind them, the unmistakable wail of the siren cutting through the stillness of the night, commanding them to stop. Malcolm flicked on his turn signal, because God forbid they give them a reason to claim they weren't cooperating, and eased the Charger to a stop at the curb. The world outside was still, eerily silent apart from the faint rustling of leaves in the breeze and the distant hum of a lawn sprinkler. All right, Isaiah murmured, shifting in his seat to face his brother. Let me do the talking. Malcolm's jaw twitched. Yeah? And what's that going to change? It's not about changing anything, Isaiah said, his voice calm but firm. It's about getting to Ava's in one piece. Malcolm didn't answer, just stared straight ahead, his nostrils flaring slightly. Then, slowly, he placed his hands on the wheel, fingers spread wide, making sure they were visible. Isaiah did the same, placing his hands on the dashboard, movements deliberate, controlled. They had both been here before. They knew the script. Footsteps crunched against the pavement as two figures approached the vehicle. A flashlight beam swept across the interior, pausing for just a second longer than necessary on their faces. Then came the voice, gruff, authoritative, laced with the unspoken certainty that this wasn't just a routine stop. License and registration. Malcolm didn't move, his expression blank, but Isaiah was already reaching for the glove compartment, his movements slow, exaggerated for the sake of appearances. "It's in here," he said evenly, looking up at the officer, making sure his tone was neutral, measured. No sudden movements. No agitation. The rules they had been forced to learn. The second officer hovered near Malcolm's window, his gaze sharp, scrutinizing. "Where are you two headed tonight?" Isaiah kept his focus on the first officer, handing over the documents without breaking eye contact. "We're on our way to our sister's house. She lives a few blocks up." The first officer took the documents without acknowledging the answer, glancing at the IDs before shifting his stance slightly. The second officer, Briggs, stepped closer to Malcolm's window, eyes narrowing slightly. "Step out of the car." Malcolm let out a slow breath through his nose, his fingers tightening on the wheel for just a fraction of a second. "Why?" Briggs's expression didn't change. "Because I said so." A muscle in Malcolm's jaw twitched, but Isaiah spoke before he could. "Officer, can we ask why we're being stopped?" The first officer, Reynolds, spoke this time. "There have been reports of break-ins in the neighborhood. You match the description." Malcolm let out a sharp, humorless laugh, shaking his head. "Oh yeah? What's that description? Black and breathing?" Isaiah's pulse quickened. "Mal!" Briggs's voice hardened. "I said step out of the car." Isaiah turned back to Reynolds, his voice still steady. "Look, we're both military officers, Delta forces. Our IDs are right there. We're just trying to visit our sister. We're not looking for trouble." Briggs scoffed. "That right? Then you shouldn't have a problem stepping out." The tension inside the vehicle had thickened to the point of suffocation, every second stretching longer, the air growing heavier. Malcolm exhaled sharply through his nose, eyes locked on Briggs, every fiber of his being screaming at him to push back. But Isaiah was still looking at him, the weight of unspoken understanding in his gaze. Malcolm clenched his jaw, then finally, slowly, reached for the door handle. The moment it clicked open, Briggs's hand went to his holster. The night was about to turn deadly. The door eased open, the soft click of the latch barely audible over the weight of unspoken tension hanging between them. Malcolm stepped out first, slow, measured, his every movement deliberate as he rose to his full height, standing just a few inches taller than the officer before him. His hands remained visible, fingers spread slightly at his sides, a silent acknowledgement of the invisible rules men like him were forced to follow. Isaiah followed, mirroring his brother's controlled movements as he stepped around the front of the car, placing himself just slightly ahead, his stance protective without being confrontational. The night air felt colder now, or maybe that was just the edge of something far more dangerous creeping in, pressing against his skin like a storm waiting to break. The officers remained rigid, their hands resting a little too comfortably near their belts, watching the twins with the kind of studied intensity that spoke less of protocol and more of personal suspicion. "Turn around, hands on the car," Briggs ordered, his tone leaving no room for discussion. Malcolm didn't move, his jaw tightened, nostrils flaring as his fingers curled slightly. For what? His voice was sharp, but not raised, not yet, because he knew better. But the weight of it was there, simmering beneath the surface. Briggs arched a brow, his lips curving into something that wasn't quite a smirk, but carried the same quiet arrogance. "Because I said so." Isaiah, already anticipating where this was going, lifted a hand slightly, not in surrender, but in a silent request for calm. "Look, officer," he started, his voice controlled, steady, the practiced tone of a man who had been here before and knew exactly how little room for error there was. "We're both Delta Force. We understand protocol. If this is a routine stop, we've given you our IDs. You can check them, see we're exactly who we say we are, We don't want any trouble. We're just trying to see our sister." Briggs gave a slow nod, eyes narrowing slightly before he reached for the IDs Isaiah had handed over earlier. He flicked on his flashlight, letting the artificial glow skim over the laminated cards as Reynolds stepped in beside him, peering over his shoulder. The two men exchanged a look, barely noticeable, but Isaiah caught it. "Out of town," Briggs muttered, his voice carrying a tone of immediate skepticism. "Neither of you live here." Malcolm let out a low, humorless chuckle, shaking his head. "That's what we told you. We're visiting our sister." Briggs ignored him, flipping the ID over before glancing up again. "So, let me get this straight. You expect me to believe that two guys with an address across the city just happen to be driving through this neighborhood, in this car, at this hour, because your sister lives here?" Isaiah exhaled slowly through his nose, forcing himself to keep his voice even. "Yes, that's exactly what we're telling you, because it's the truth." Reynolds, who had remained quiet up until now, shifted slightly, the light from Briggs's flashlight casting deep shadows across his face as he spoke for the first time. "Yeah? And what does your sister do to afford a place around here?" Isaiah stiffened, his eyes locking onto Reynolds's in that split-second exchange where the weight of the question was fully understood. It wasn't phrased outright, but the implication was clear. A black woman living in this kind of neighborhood? The suggestion hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Malcolm's lips parted, his patience fracturing audibly in the sharp breath he sucked in. "Excuse me?" Reynolds held his gaze unflinching, as if daring him to press it further. "Just saying, not a lot of people from your side of town end up in places like this without a good reason." Isaiah stepped forward before Malcolm could react, his body positioned just enough to physically interrupt whatever was about to happen. "She's a lawyer," he said, his voice sharper now, clipped in a way it hadn't been before. "Graduated top of her class. Works for one of the biggest firms in the city. That a good enough reason for you?" Briggs let out a slow exhale, tilting his head slightly as he studied them both, as if weighing their words, their worth. Then, without another comment, he turned, walking back toward his squad car. Isaiah let out a quiet breath, thinking for just a moment that maybe, just maybe, this was about to de-escalate. But then Briggs stopped, turning slightly over his shoulder. "Stay where you are," he muttered, disappearing inside his vehicle. Isaiah could hear the faint sound of radio static crackling from inside the car, a murmur of indistinct voices exchanging information, a background check. They were running them through the system. "They're stalling," Malcolm muttered under his breath, shaking his head. "Running our names like we're goddamn criminals." Isaiah didn't respond immediately, just kept his eyes on the officers, his hands loose at his sides but ready. They were pushing, looking for a reason, an excuse, something to justify whatever was already forming in their minds. "Let's just keep cool," Isaiah murmured, though even he could feel the control slipping, the space for logic closing in. Malcolm turned slightly toward him, voice low, edged. "You think that's going to change a damn thing?" Before Isaiah could answer, Briggs returned, his face unreadable, but his presence carrying something heavier now, something more resolute. He stepped back toward them, the flashlight still in his grip, and gestured. "All right," he said. "Hands on the car. Both of you." Isaiah took a slow breath, bracing himself. "Come on, man. We gave you everything you asked for. You know exactly who we are, where we're going. What are you still looking for?" Briggs didn't waver. "Step to the car." Malcolm didn't move. Briggs's hand went to his holster. Isaiah saw it happen in slow motion. The shift in posture, the way the air seemed to thicken, the silent understanding of what came next, if they didn't comply. His own breath caught for just a second. But then, with a slow, reluctant motion, he turned, placing his hands against the cool metal of the Charger's hood. Malcolm hesitated a second longer before finally, begrudgingly, following suit. The moment his hands touched the car, Briggs grabbed his wrist. Isaiah saw the first real flash of emotion break across Malcolm's face. A sharp flicker of something primal, something furious, and that was all it took. The spark had been lit. The night was about to ignite. The cold metal of the Charger's hood pressed against Malcolm's palms, the rough texture biting into his skin as Briggs's hands moved with unnecessary force over his back, pressing hard against his ribs before sliding lower. The pressure wasn't just about the search. It was meant to provoke, to remind him who was in control. The weight of the moment settled over him, thick and suffocating, the air sharp with the unspoken tension of a game that had already been rigged against them before it even began. "Spread your legs wider," Briggs muttered, his tone clipped, edged with an arrogance that sent a hot pulse of anger straight through Malcolm's chest. Malcolm exhaled sharply, adjusting his stance, but only barely, just enough to avoid giving them anything they could twist into non-compliance. His fingers curled slightly over the hood. "Man, come on," he muttered, his voice low, brimming with frustration. "Ain't like I got a damn arsenal on me." Briggs didn't respond, didn't even acknowledge him, just continued the search, his hands pressing rougher now, shoving at Malcolm's pockets, his grip tightening like he was waiting for resistance. "You got a problem?" Briggs asked, his breath close now, deliberate, as his fingers dug into Malcolm's arm. Malcolm shifted slightly, his muscles tensing beneath the touch. "Yeah, I got a problem. My problem is some punk throwing me up against my own damn car like I just knocked over a damn convenience store." Briggs's grip tightened. Isaiah, still pressed against the Charger beside him, felt the shift in the air before the words even fully registered. This was it, the moment the officers had been waiting for. "Mal," Isaiah warned, his voice tense but controlled, his eyes darting toward his brother with an urgency that was more than just a plea. It was survival. Briggs let out a slow, amused breath. "Listen to your brother, boy," he muttered, the last words sliding out of his mouth like venom, slow and deliberate, meant to cut deep. The night snapped. Malcolm jerked, twisting slightly, his head snapping toward Briggs, his breath sharp, his entire body coiled like a loaded spring. Isaiah moved instantly, pressing forward, shoulder against Malcolm's, physically blocking him before the last thread of restraint could break. "Malcolm, stop." Isaiah's voice was steady, but laced with urgency, his hands raised slightly in a placating motion. "Not here, not now." But Malcolm's breath was already coming too hard, too fast, his nostrils flaring, his fingers flexing at his sides. His instincts were screaming at him, demanding that he fight back, that he refused to let them turn him into a victim. Briggs tilted his head, smirking just enough to let them know he'd already won. "That's what I thought," he murmured. Then, slow and deliberate, he reached for his belt. Isaiah's pulse spiked. "All right," Briggs said, pulling out his handcuffs, letting the metal glint under the streetlight. "We're detaining you both while we confirm your story." Isaiah stepped forward. "Detained for what?" Briggs shrugged. "Resisting a lawful search. Possible obstruction. Hell, maybe even suspicion of intent. We got plenty of reasons." "That's a lie," Malcolm snapped, jerking away the moment Briggs reached for him, and that was all they needed. Briggs's grip latched onto Malcolm's arm, yanking him toward the car with unnecessary force, his shoulder wrenching forward at an awkward angle. Malcolm instinctively twisted, trying to regain his balance, and in that split second, Reynolds stepped in, gripping his other arm and pushing against his back, trying to force him down. Isaiah reached for Malcolm's shoulder, trying to stabilize him. "Just go with it, man. Just let them—" "Let go of me!" Malcolm barked, his voice cracking with the raw frustration of a man who had been through this before, who had been humiliated enough times to know where it led. He wasn't fighting. He wasn't attacking. He was reacting, but that didn't matter to them. Briggs shoved hard. Malcolm staggered. "He's resisting!" Briggs shouted, his voice already changing, twisting reality into a lie. Reynolds pulled back, his hand moving quickly to his belt. "He's got a weapon!" Isaiah saw it happen before it even did. The words were still in the air when Briggs reached for his gun, his movements rehearsed, practiced, like he'd been waiting for the moment to make the call. Malcolm twisted one last time, breath sharp, teeth bared, and then the gunshot cracked the air open. Malcolm jerked violently, his entire body snapping backward, his chest arching before his knees gave out beneath him. His breath hitched, a sound halfway between shock and disbelief, before he crumpled onto the pavement. Isaiah's scream tore through the night. "Malcolm!" He moved without thinking, lunging toward his brother. But before he could reach him, a white-hot explosion of pain surged through his chest. The taser hit him full force, electricity ripping through his body, locking his muscles into place, stealing the breath from his lungs. His legs gave out, his vision swimming as he hit the ground. "Officer down! He tried to grab my gun!" Briggs was screaming now, his voice frantic, but Isaiah could hear the lie in it, the premeditation, the way it was already being molded into the version they would tell. "Backup needed," Reynolds echoed, his voice high, breathless, his hand still gripping the smoking gun. Isaiah fought against the paralysis gripping his limbs, his vision hazy, his ears still ringing as he tried to push himself up, his body rebelling against him. His eyes found Malcolm. His brother lay sprawled just feet away, his chest barely rising, his fingers twitching weakly, his mouth parting slightly as if he was trying to say something. Isaiah dragged himself forward, his body screaming against the movement. "Malcolm, hold on, man." Malcolm coughed, a wet, ragged sound, his fingers weakly grasping at the air before finding Isaiah's arm, gripping with what little strength he had left. His lips trembled as his breath hitched, his eyes searching Isaiah's with something heavy, something Isaiah didn't want to understand. "Isaiah," Malcolm's voice barely came, choked, strained, each word a fight. His fingers dug weakly into Isaiah's sleeve. "I'm sorry." Isaiah's breath shattered. "No, don't. Hold on, just—" His voice broke, his hand pressing over Malcolm's wound as if he could force time to reverse, to undo what had already been set in motion. Isaiah's hands trembled as he pressed down on the warmth spreading across his brother's chest, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps, his heart slamming against his ribs so hard it felt like his entire body might shatter beneath the weight of what was happening. Malcolm's body twitched weakly beneath him, his fingers barely moving, the warmth of life slipping away faster than Isaiah could hold it together. "Malcolm, stay with me, man," Isaiah begged, his voice cracking under the force of his own panic, the words coming too fast, too desperate. "Come on, man. You're good. You're good. You hear me? Just breathe. Just—" His voice broke as Malcolm's eyes fluttered, barely open, his lips parting. But no real sound came out. "Malcolm, please," Isaiah choked, his hands pressing harder against the wound, as if he could force his brother's life to stay inside his body, as if sheer desperation alone could undo the horror spilling out between his fingers. "Look at me, man. Just look at me. You ain't going nowhere. You hear me? You're not." Malcolm let out a weak, wheezing breath, his fingers twitching against Isaiah's sleeve, grasping, barely holding on. His lips moved, voice nothing more than a whisper, broken and trembling. "Don't let them," Malcolm coughed, his body seizing up under the pain, his fingers tightening with what little strength he had left. "Don't let them get away with this." Isaiah's breath hitched, his vision swimming with hot, stinging tears as he grasped onto his brother's hands, squeezing them, refusing to let go. No, don't say that. You hear me? You're not dying, man. You're not. You can't." Then came the voices. "Get off him!" Hands wrenched at the back of Isaiah's jacket, tearing him away with a violent yank that sent him sprawling backward, his knees scraping against the pavement as he fought against them, his arms clawing forward, trying to hold on to Malcolm. No, please." A sharp blow slammed into his ribs, white-hot pain exploding through his side as his breath punched out of his lungs. The impact sent him curling inward, instinctively shielding himself before another hit crashed into his side. Then another, each one a brutal punctuation to his screaming grief. "Stop resisting!" Isaiah gasped as he was forced onto his stomach, the rough asphalt scraping against his face as weight crushed down on his back, a knee digging into his spine so hard it made his ribs groan in protest. His wrists were yanked behind him, his arms twisted at an unnatural angle, metal clamping down against his skin with sharp, biting force. "You think you can attack us?" A hand fisted into his hair, yanking his head back so he was forced to look up, forced to stare into Briggs's face, his teeth bared, his eyes gleaming with unchecked fury. "You killed my brother!" Isaiah screamed, his voice raw, shattered, the words barely making it past the sheer force of his rage and agony. "You shot him! He didn't do anything!" Briggs scoffed, shoving Isaiah's head back down like he was nothing. "Yeah? That what you think? 'Cause what I saw was a dangerous suspect resisting arrest." Isaiah's chest heaved, his body trembling beneath the weight pressing him into the pavement. He was unarmed. "You murdered him." His voice cracked, his throat burning, each word dragged from the deepest part of him, the part that had just lost the only person who had ever understood him completely. "You killed him in the street like a damn animal. And now you're gonna act like we deserved this?" Briggs twisted his grip harder, pressing his knee down with more force until Isaiah let out a strangled cry. "You know how this works, right? Who do you think they're gonna believe?" Isaiah sucked in a shaky breath, his entire body going stiff as a hollow, gut-wrenching realization settled over him. This was always how it ended. Briggs stood, dusting off his uniform, like this was just another day, another routine, nothing more than an inconvenience. "We'll take it from here," he called out to the other officers arriving, his voice steady, confident, dripping with the certainty of a man who knew he would never face consequences. Reynolds hovered beside him, shifting slightly, his hands shaking as he holstered his weapon. His eyes flickered toward Isaiah, something hesitant in his expression, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. He stepped back, nodded. "He reached for a weapon," Briggs said smoothly, his voice carrying across the street, as if the lie had already been accepted as truth. "We had no choice." Isaiah's stomach twisted, bile rising in his throat. The words had already changed. The story was already being rewritten. His breath stuttered, a fresh wave of nausea rolling through him as he turned his head just enough to see Malcolm's body still lying motionless on the pavement, his blood pooling beneath him, dark and thick, seeping into the cracks of the concrete. His brother, his twin, his other half, gone. And they were going to erase him. "Hey!" A new voice cut through the chaos, sharp and demanding. "What is going on here?" Isaiah barely processed it before he was yanked up by his cuffs, his body hauled forward like dead weight. His vision swam, dizziness crashing over him, the world tilting violently as he was dragged toward the back of a squad car. "You're under arrest for assaulting an officer," someone muttered, but the words barely registered. White noise against the static roaring in his head. The door wrenched open, and then he was shoved inside, his body slamming against the hard plastic seat with enough force to make his ribs scream in protest. Through the smeared glass, Malcolm was still lying there. Still alone. Still bleeding out in the street, while the men who murdered him stood over him, deciding what version of the truth they would tell the world. Isaiah's fingers curled into fists behind his back, nails digging so hard into his palms that he thought they might break skin. Briggs walked past the window, his expression calm, composed, already moving on, like he had just checked another box on his to-do list. The last thing Isaiah saw before the door slammed shut was Malcolm's lifeless body, left behind on the pavement, like he had never mattered at all. The world blurred. Isaiah sat slumped against the cold plastic seat of the squad car, his wrists still bound behind him, the metal digging deep into his skin, but the pain barely registered. His breath came in short, hollow gasps, his chest rising and falling in uneven bursts as the blood rushing through his veins drowned out everything else. He could still feel the weight of Malcolm in his arms, could still hear the tremor in his brother's breath, the way his voice had cracked, those last words slipping out, barely above a whisper. "Don't let them get away with this." His throat tightened, his teeth clenching so hard that his jaw ached. But it didn't matter. None of it did, because Malcolm was gone, and he hadn't been able to stop it. The night passed in fragments, red and blue lights flashing against the pavement, indistinct voices shouting orders, the cold press of cuffs, the rough hands shoving him forward, the scent of sweat, asphalt, and blood clinging to the air. At some point, the car had started moving, the weight of the moment shifting as the squad car rolled away, taking him with it, dragging him away from Malcolm, away from the only piece of family that had ever felt like home. He didn't know how long they drove. The streets blurred together, indistinct shapes and neon signs streaking past the window, like something out of a dream. But none of it felt real. Nothing felt real. His fingers twitched uselessly behind him, his nails digging into his palms, his muscles locked so tight his entire body felt like it might snap under the pressure. His mind kept looping back, kept dragging him back to the last time he and Malcolm had been in a car together, just hours earlier, laughing about identical houses in a neighborhood that wasn't made for them. Ava liked that when she bought the place, said it felt safe. Safe. A choked, bitter sound pressed against the back of his throat, but it never made it past his lips. The weight of grief was too thick, too heavy, coiling around his ribs like a steel vice. His head tipped back against the seat, his gaze unfocused, his thoughts slipping into the past like water through trembling fingers. He and Malcolm had always been together, always, from the moment they were born, side by side, their mother holding them close, whispering their names like they were meant to be spoken in the same breath. Malcolm and Isaiah. Isaiah and Malcolm. They had fought together, laughed together, bled together. They had survived. As kids, they had learned young what it meant to be feared before they were even old enough to understand why. They had learned to keep their hands visible in convenience stores, to stay still when a cop car rolled by, to smile just enough to seem unthreatening but not so much that it looked forced. They had learned to control their anger, to bury it deep, to push it down so far that it couldn't be used against them. But Malcolm had never been able to push it far enough. Isaiah had always been the one to step in, the one to keep him grounded, the one to pull him back when the world tried to push him too far. But this time, this one time, he hadn't been fast enough. He hadn't been strong enough. He hadn't saved him. He squeezed his eyes shut, his head pounding, his hands curling into fists behind him. It should have been him. If he had just stepped in sooner, if he had just kept Malcolm from speaking, from moving, from breathing too freely in a space that was never meant for them. The car slowed, turning sharply, and the sudden motion yanked him out of his thoughts. His eyes opened, his breath catching as the reality of the moment crashed back into him. The precinct loomed ahead, its fluorescent lights buzzing against the night, sterile and indifferent. The car rolled to a stop. A door opened, then hands were on him again, dragging him forward, forcing his body upright as his legs struggled to catch up with the movement. His feet stumbled against the pavement as they hauled him out of the car, the shift in motion sending another wave of dizziness crashing over him. His ribs throbbed, his skull still aching from where he had been slammed into the ground. But the officers didn't slow, didn't care. The inside of the station was just as harsh, all white tile and dull overhead lights, the scent of sweat and coffee thick in the air. He was shoved forward, past rows of desks, past officers who barely even looked up as he was dragged through the booking process, barely more than a body, barely even a person. They took his fingerprints, his mugshot. They took everything. And through it all, he said nothing. Not because he had nothing to say, but because none of it mattered. Malcolm was dead. They had won. Time passed in a haze. He didn't know how long he had been sitting there, his body slumped in a hard plastic chair, his hands cuffed to the table in front of him. His head hung low, his breathing shallow, his thoughts tangled in something too thick, too dark to pull himself out of. The door creaked open. Isaiah barely reacted, his body too heavy, too exhausted, the weight of his grief sinking so deep he wasn't sure he could ever climb out of it. Then, Isaiah! The voice snapped through him like a jolt of electricity. His head lifted. Ava stood in the doorway, her eyes wide, her chest heaving, her entire body radiating something sharp, something barely contained. Her hands trembled as she stepped forward, as she took in the bruises blooming along his jaw, the dried blood crusting at the corner of his mouth, the way his wrists were still bound to the table like he was the criminal. For a moment, she said nothing. Then her breath hitched, and her face twisted into something Isaiah had never seen before. Something shattered, and Isaiah realized she already knew. The weight of it crushed him all over again. Ava stood in the doorway, her breath shallow, her fingers curled into fists at her sides as she took in the sight of her brother. His head bowed, his wrists shackled to the table, his entire body slumped with the weight of something she couldn't begin to put into words. Isaiah barely moved. He sat there, still as stone, his chest rising and falling in slow, uneven breaths. His face was bruised, dark splotches blooming along his jaw and beneath his right eye, his knuckles raw, dried blood still crusted at the corner of his mouth. His clothes were stained, dirt, sweat, and something darker smudging the fabric. But none of that was what made Ava's stomach twist into knots. It was his eyes. They were empty. Ava swallowed hard, forcing down the burn in her throat as she stepped forward, the sharp click of her heels against the linoleum cutting through the heavy silence. She wasn't here to cry. She wasn't here to grieve. Not yet. Right now. Isaiah needed her. She pulled out the chair across from him, scraping it against the floor as she sat down. Isaiah. Her voice was steady, firm. It took him a second to react, his gaze slowly lifting to meet hers. His eyes were bloodshot, ringed with exhaustion so deep it looked like it had settled into his bones. He blinked once, sluggish, as if pulling himself back into the present required effort. They killed him, he murmured, his voice hoarse, raw from screaming. Ava inhaled sharply through her nose, her jaw tightening. She forced herself to push through it, to keep her composure, to shove aside the grief clawing at her insides long enough to get him out of this room. I know, she said, the words barely above a whisper. I know, Isaiah. He let out a slow, uneven breath, his fingers twitching against the cold metal of the cuffs. They shot him in the street like a dog. His voice cracked slightly, but there was no real emotion behind it. Just emptiness, just fact. Ava reached forward, her fingers brushing lightly against his wrists, against the metal digging into his skin. We're getting you out of here. A flicker of something crossed Isaiah's face. Not quite hope, but something close enough to it that Ava held on to it with everything she had. They're charging me, he muttered. Assaulting an officer. Resisting arrest. They're going to say Malcolm attacked them. They're already saying it. Ava's stomach twisted. Of course they were. The lie was already forming, already being pushed forward in official statements and press briefings, already being shaped into something that painted the men with badges as heroes, and Malcolm as the aggressor. Isaiah's breath shuddered, his hands clenching into fists. He didn't fight them, Ava. I swear to you, he didn't. Isaiah. Ava reached forward again, her grip firm but careful. I believe you. I believe you. Isaiah closed his eyes for a brief second, just enough to let the weight of her words settle over him before opening them again. They're gonna get away with it, aren't they? Ava's lips parted slightly, her throat tightening. She wanted to tell him no. She wanted to tell him that the law worked, that there was a path forward, that Malcolm would get justice. But she wasn't about to lie to him. Instead, she took a breath, straightened her spine, and forced every ounce of confidence into her voice. Right now, I need to focus on getting you out of here. After that, we fight. But we don't get to do anything if you're still in a jail cell. Understand? Isaiah held her gaze for a long moment before giving a slow, reluctant nod. Good, Ava said, already shifting into action. She reached into her bag, pulling out a stack of documents, setting them on the table with sharp precision. I've already spoken to a judge. I filed for emergency bail consideration, but the police are pushing back. They're claiming you're a flight risk. Isaiah scoffed, shaking his head. A flight risk? You serious? They're stalling, Ava confirmed, her lips pressing into a thin line, buying themselves time while they craft their story. If they keep you in here long enough, they control the entire narrative. I can't let that happen. Isaiah exhaled sharply, his jaw clenching. So, what's the plan? Ava sat forward. I filed a motion for an immediate review of the charges, which means I can argue for your release in front of a judge first thing in the morning. But that's not enough. I need leverage. I need pressure. Isaiah frowned slightly, his brow furrowing. What kind of pressure? Ava glanced toward the two-way mirror, knowing full well that someone was listening, and lowered her voice just slightly. I called every journalist I know, every activist, every civil rights lawyer, everyone. By morning, the entire city is going to be watching this case. The more eyes on it, the harder it'll be for them to bury the truth. Isaiah stared at her, a flicker of something unreadable passing across his face. You really think that's gonna work? Ava leaned in. I think they want to make you disappear, but they can't if we make sure the entire damn country is looking at them. Isaiah swallowed, his throat tight. He wanted to believe her. He needed to believe her. But he had seen too many names turned into hashtags, too many bodies left in the street with no justice to follow. Ava could see the doubt, the exhaustion, the raw hopelessness clawing at him. She reached out again, this time grasping his hand, her grip firm, grounding. I'm getting you out of here, she repeated, her voice steady, unwavering. I swear to you, Isaiah, you are not going to rot in here while they turn Malcolm into some thug who deserved to die. Not while I'm still breathing. Isaiah exhaled, something deep in his chest shifting. The moment Isaiah stepped out of the station, the air hit him like a slap to the face. Cold, sharp, too open after the suffocating walls of the holding cell. He inhaled deep, filling his lungs, but it wasn't enough. The weight in his chest didn't lift. The shackles on his wrists were gone, but they had been replaced with something heavier, something that no court order or legal maneuver could undo. Ava was beside him, walking with purpose, her heels clicking against the pavement, her posture straight and controlled. But Isaiah could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers clenched the strap of her briefcase too tightly. She had won this battle. Barely. But she was already bracing for the war ahead. Outside the precinct, a wall of reporters and flashing cameras lined the barricades, microphones extended forward, voices shouting questions, news vans parked along the curb, their headlights illuminating the chaos. Ava had done exactly what she said she would. The city was watching. Isaiah, do you have anything to say about the charges against you? Isaiah. What happened that night? Do you believe the officers acted unlawfully? He didn't stop, didn't look at them. His jaw was locked, his fingers curling into fists at his sides, his pulse roaring in his ears. He couldn't be here. He couldn't breathe with all these people shoving microphones in his face, waiting for him to break, waiting for a quote, waiting to twist whatever words he said into something neat and palatable for the 6 o'clock news. Ava didn't stop either. She pressed forward, her grip firm on his arm as they moved toward the waiting car. The cameras flashed. The questions kept coming, but the moment the car door shut behind them, the world outside became nothing more than a distant hum. Isaiah stared ahead, his jaw tight, his body stiff. Ava exhaled beside him, her fingers pressed against her temple, her breath unsteady for just a moment before she composed herself again. You okay? She asked softly. He didn't answer, Because no, he wasn't okay. He had just been released from a cell after watching his brother die in the street. He had been beaten, cuffed, accused, and now the same system that let those officers pull the trigger was still holding him by the throat, still twisting the truth, still making sure that he was the criminal. No, he wasn't okay. But what did that even matter? Ava exhaled again, shifting in her seat. "We're going straight home," she said. "You need to rest. We'll talk about everything tomorrow." Isaiah just kept staring ahead. The first thing Isaiah noticed when they walked through the door was how normal everything looked. The living room was still warm with the scent of lavender and wood polish. The couch still had the same deep indent from where Malcolm always sat. Their mother's old quilt still draped over the back, like she had left it there herself. For a split second, Isaiah could almost pretend Malcolm was in the next room, almost pretend that if he just walked down the hall, he'd find him there, scrolling through his phone, smirking at some stupid joke, breathing. But then, the weight of reality crashed down again, and the silence in the house felt unbearable. Ava set her briefcase on the table, rolling her shoulders as she exhaled. "All right. First thing tomorrow, we start putting pressure on the DA's office. I already have a few people reaching out, but we need to push harder. They're going to try and stall, hoping this blows over. But it won't, not this time." Isaiah sat on the couch, leaning forward, his elbows on his knees, his fingers laced together as he stared at the floor. "And if they don't do anything?" His voice was quieter now, steadier, but still heavy with something unresolved. Ava hesitated for a fraction of a second before responding. "Then we take it higher. We push for federal involvement. Civil rights violations, anything we can throw at them." Isaiah nodded slowly, but the emptiness in his eyes didn't change. And just like that, the days bled together. The calls were made. The paperwork was filed. The protests outside the police department grew larger. The city boiled with tension. And every single attempt at justice was met with the same response. "We're still reviewing the case. There isn't sufficient evidence at this time to proceed with charges." The officers were acting in the line of duty. Isaiah sat in silence as he listened to the news updates, as he watched Ava's frustration mount, as he watched every single person with the power to do something step back, fold their hands, and do nothing. Every door they knocked on led to another excuse, another delay, another carefully worded statement about ongoing investigations and due process. The system wasn't just broken. It was doing exactly what it was built to do. And Isaiah could feel something shifting inside him, a slow burn, a weight pressing against his ribs, pushing harder, making it impossible to breathe. Isaiah was sitting at the dining table, staring blankly at his untouched plate of food, the news droning in the background. Ava sat across from him, her phone pressed to her ear, her free hand gripping a pen so tightly her knuckles turned white. "That's not good enough," she snapped, her voice sharp, laced with an anger she was barely holding back. "They have body cam footage. Where is it? Why hasn't it been released?" Isaiah barely heard her. His eyes had drifted toward the TV, the headline scrolling across the screen. "Press conference. Police chief speaks on tragic incident involving Malcolm Carter." The screen cut to a podium. The police department's emblem displayed proudly behind the man standing in front of the microphones. "The loss of life is always unfortunate," the chief said, his voice steady, smooth, rehearsed. "Our officers were faced with a life-threatening situation, and they responded accordingly. The suspect was hostile, uncooperative, and attempted to reach for a weapon. They had no choice but to defend themselves." The camera panned slightly. Briggs and Reynolds stood to the side, their faces blank, their uniforms crisp. Then, Briggs stepped forward. "It's always difficult when situations escalate like this," he said, his voice just the right amount of solemn, just the right amount of regretful. "We never want to take a life, but when an officer feels threatened, we have to protect ourselves. I feared for my life." Isaiah's fingers curled into his palms. "I wish things had gone differently," Briggs continued. "But that man left us no choice." Something inside Isaiah snapped. The emptiness in his eyes burned away, replaced with something sharper. something hotter, something that made his entire body go rigid. Ava was still on the phone, her voice rising, but she must have seen it. The way his entire demeanor shifted, the way his hands trembled with something far more dangerous than grief. Isaiah? He didn't respond, because at that moment, the fire had consumed him completely, and he knew, if the system wasn't going to give him justice, then he was going to take it himself. He hadn't realized his nails had dug so deep into his palms that they'd drawn blood until Ava's voice cut through the air. Isaiah. It was cautious. A name spoken not in authority, not in reassurance, but in knowing. He didn't look at her, didn't move, didn't do anything but keep his gaze fixed on the television, as if burning holes into the screen would make the lies unravel. Ava set her phone down, exhaling sharply. Isaiah, talk to me. His jaw twitched, his fingers flexing. You heard it, he said, his voice lower than usual, rough, as if it had been scraped raw from the inside out. You heard every damn word. Ava hesitated, then nodded slowly. I did. Isaiah inhaled through his nose, forcing himself to keep the anger contained, but it was pushing against his ribs, slamming against his chest, burning hot enough that it felt like it might split him open from the inside. He turned toward her then, his movements controlled, but his eyes, they were different, no longer hollow, no longer grief-stricken. They burned. And what do we do now? His voice was eerily calm, the kind of calm that existed only in the moments before a storm. Ava's lips parted slightly, her fingers tightening around the edge of the table as she measured her words. We keep fighting, she said, her voice firm, unwavering, the words carrying the weight of someone who had spent her entire life navigating the legal battlefield. Someone who had built an entire career out of pushing against an immovable system. We go back at them harder. We apply more pressure. We make sure they don't get to control the narrative. Isaiah let out a sharp, bitter exhale, shaking his head. The narrative, he muttered, the word tasting like acid in his mouth. That's all it is to them, isn't it? A damn story. A version of events they get to shape, get to bend until it fits what they need it to be. Ava held his gaze, her breath steady, but Isaiah could see it, the flicker of unease beneath her composure. The way she was bracing herself. Isaiah leaned forward, placing his hands on the table, his knuckles white. Malcolm is dead, Ava. His voice wavered for just a fraction of a second before it hardened again. And they're gonna walk. You know it. I know it. Hell, they know it. Every time we apply pressure, every time we push harder, all we're doing is playing their game. But the system is already rigged, and we're the only ones still pretending like it's not. Ava swallowed, her fingers gripping tighter. Isaiah, you told me to believe in the system. Isaiah pressed on, his voice rising, not with hysteria, but with something deeper, something raw and unfiltered. You told me there was a way forward, that there was still a chance for justice. And I did. I sat here. I waited. I watched you fight for every angle, and all we've gotten is locked doors, empty statements, and those pigs standing up there on national television calling my brother a threat. Ava's face tightened, but she didn't speak. Isaiah exhaled sharply, shoving away from the table, pacing, his hands running over his head, frustration rolling off of him in waves. Self-defense, he spat. Fear for their lives. He let out a harsh, humorless laugh, shaking his head. That's all it takes, huh? That's all it takes to justify murder. Ava pushed up from her seat now, standing, her voice stronger. You think I don't know that? She snapped, and for the first time, there was an edge of something unrestrained in her voice, something that slipped past the controlled mask she always